Okay, it is 8 o'clock. Looks like we're all here, so I am going to call the November 22nd, 2022 Whatcom County Public Utility District Commission meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Any proposed changes?
I have none.
Okay,
Tool, I am sending out, so you know, an executive session invite for, so you'll find that on your calendar sometime in the next 15-20 minutes. That'll be for later in the meeting. I had not sent one out earlier, so.
I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 The next item, oh, the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is our consent agenda, the approval of the minutes from our November 8th regular meeting and the approval of claims for November 22nd.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as it reads.
I'll second that.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We got an aye from you, O'Toole.
Yes, aye.
Okay, great. The motion carries. Next item on our agenda is public comment. We have public comment at the beginning of our meetings and the end of our meetings. Would love to hear from anyone. Okay, not seeing any hands raised on Zoom or people coming up to the microphone here in the commission meeting room, so we're going to move on. Again, we do have a public comment at the end of the meeting before our executive session. So I will close public comment now and we will move on to old business. And the first and only item under old business is the broadband program update, which is going to be a discussion mostly about our telecom feasibility study, which is posted on our website.
It is now posted on the website, and Andrew Entrican has put together a PowerPoint presentation just to kind of cover the high points and guide us through the discussion. At this point, I'd ask Andrew to go ahead and share his screen. And we want to have a discussion about the feasibility study.
Great. Take it away, Andrew. Okay.
You want to go to the agenda slide, Andrew? All right. So this is what we're going to cover. Really, it's why we did the study, what the fundamental assumptions were, because that gives you an idea of what to relax if you want to look at different aspects of it, what the study itself concluded, and then what staff recommends to do with those conclusions. And then obviously we'll have questions following it or during it as the case may be. Andrew? Do you want to do this part, Andrew?
Sure, I can walk through this. So just a little bit about the background and prior to 2021, Port of Bellingham worked pretty much alone. Well, not pretty much, they did work alone and secured grant funding. We've had many conversations about the port's projects up to date. They've done a tremendous job, secured more than $10 million. And then in 2021, the Port and PUD, as you know, signed the interlocal agreement to allow our two organizations to work together towards a common goal. And to that end, we thought the PUD would build off of the port's feasibility study that they had conducted back in 2019, because that study was primarily focused on middle mile, and we were looking at fiber to the premise because that's where the funding is going. And so we initiated this broadband feasibility study to find the best way to approach funding and what type of infrastructure would best be needed to serve unserved customers. And so we looked at two different things, and in terms of a lit retail model and a dark fiber model, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. but we thought we'd put together a really good team to help walk us through this planning exercise. And so we engaged the top two consulting agencies in this field in the state, and one being NOAANET and Petrichor Broadband, and both come with very distinctive core competencies that we wanted to enlist their support to get through this. And so the study itself is $62,500, which is $50,000 of that comes from a grant that's funded by CURB, or the Community Economic Revitalization Board. And then there was a percentage match, and that's for the remaining, that's how we get to the $62,500. So that's just
Hey,
real.
Andrew.
Yep.
Sorry to, do you want to take questions as you go or at the end? I see Atul has a hand up. So.
Sure, I'm okay either way. I'll leave that. I'll rely on Chris for what he thinks.
Commissioner Deshmani, do you have a question?
Yeah, and I think a way I'd like to proceed is let Andrew present the slide and then ask the question relevant to the slide rather than interrupt him in the middle of a slide.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we saw your hand.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the reasons I raised my hand. Is that workable for you, Andrew, to just let you do the slide and then ask the question about the slide?
That works for me. Whatever's most convenient for you commissioners. So that works.
Okay. So
Okay, do you just,
I have a question
go ahead.
I have a question on the third bullet, it's not a bullet, but the third statement you have on the slide, and specifically on the word and the meaning here of unserved customers. And what I want to know is, of course, you know, this terminology and defining it precisely, it varies a little bit how people define these things. So when we say unserved, does the study apply at all to the issue of underserved, or does it, from your perspective, does it really only answer questions about those that are unserved? And particularly when we get to economic return on investment type of conversations.
Sure. There's I'll try to be as clear as possible. The federal government the FCC identifies underserved as 100 down, 20 up, and unserved as those not receiving 25-3. But then our state says, well, you're unserved if you're not meeting 100 down, 20 up. So this study looks at underserved and unserved, but to the sense of what folks are not receiving 100 down, 20 speeds, if that makes sense.
It does. It's thanks for that. And obviously I'm putting that in my head as we're going through the other slides. So thanks.
Chris, did I miss anything on this slide?
Well, I just wanted to mention that as a condition of getting the grant funding through CURB, part of it was to do a very detailed analysis of the community, kind of a la an economic disparity study. So in the study itself, you'll see a ton of work that's been done around segmenting the community. That's, we needed to do that just so we would know, but we also needed to do it to check the box on the grant.
Okay. With the $12,500 that wasn't covered by the grant, was that funding from the Mount Baker Foundation or funding from elsewhere?
No, I believe that was internally funded.
Okay.
Correct.
Thanks, Andrew. Do you have any questions? Okay. Go ahead. So
under the assumptions, we touched on this a little bit. Consultants determine and use the same construction costs for their scenarios. And the first being so let me back up, scenarios in the sense of what are we studying? And the publicly owned and operated lit retail service model, which was modeled by NOAANET. And then the publicly owned contractually operated dark fiber network that was modeled by Petrichor. So the same number of passes, take rate, build out growth rates, so on and so forth, capital costs, 100% initial capital secured through grant funding. And that's a really important distinction because that's, again, part of the assumptions. We know that it needs to be 100% grant funded, whatever it is that we end up building in terms of the infrastructure.
Atul, do you have a question? On the
No,
assumptions?
my hand was still up from previous. I put it down. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we just bulleted out the findings, some of the significant findings out of the study. And you'll notice that the cost per pass, and what we mean by cost per pass is how do you get a piece of fiber optic cable infrastructure up to the side of the house? And that comes in at a little more than $13,000 per home pass. And that's consistent with what we've seen in previous rounds of funding through CURB, Public Works Board, and the State Broadband Office. They range anywhere from 6 to 12. And so we're coming in a little bit higher in terms of the market we're trying to reach. But again, right in there, consistent with previous analysis for these are high cost customers to serve. That's why they're not served today. So we looked at the dark fiber model cost to succeed financially and not require future subsidy. Again, 100% grant funded and not require a future subsidy. And when we look at that, and then we look at the ISP model and the need to not subsidize, what we found was that in the ISP model, it would in fact require future subsidy, and we wouldn't recover all of our costs. And so it's the cash from operations on the dark fiber is more than the cash from operations on the lit fiber in by the end of 2033. And in the lit model, the electronics would need to be replaced in those 10 years. And as of today, the consultants, NONET, came up with a value of nearly $300,000 for the electronics today. So who knows what those will be in 10 years. And there's no revenues currently in the modeling to support those upgrades, which puts the lit model in the red in that same time period.
So we also constrain this to be competitive with, what folks were talking about, $70 a month, typical charges for high-speed internet and things like that. So the fact that it's not financially viable in year 10, you could raise rates and recover enough to do that. But then you'd run the problem of, having something that's essentially unaffordable, which would get away from what we're trying to do here.
Mhm. Although in 10 years, I mean, just with inflation and everything, rates for everything will probably be higher, right? Did
We
account-
included that in the
okay,
studies,
I see.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, we use both inflation and escalation factors in
Okay.
there that were consistent in both models.
okay. I just I noticed in the report, there's a difference between homes passed and homes activated. And the number you have up there is the cost per pass, right? That doesn't mean that the home is activated, correct?
Correct.
So is an activated home is gonna cost, this is just the dollars we would put in, then there's the cost for the customer to get activated, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that typically is, the actual installation of the router and the hooking up of the modem and that kind of stuff. And ISPs charge typically between $100 and $500 depending on what the customer wants.
Mm-hmm,
So that's assumed to be common,
mm-hmm,
and that if we're serving the customer, we're the ISP, we incur those costs.
Mhm.
Otherwise, those costs are incurred by the customer
mm-hmm,
when they contact an ISP in the dark fiber model.
mm-hmm.
And so we're assuming that that's a wash. So
Mhm.
that is another fundamental assumption that's in this.
And the cost per pass math assumes any home that the fiber passes would be included.
That's correct.
And that's not what we'll see in reality.
No,
likely.
we assumed an initial 40% take
Mhm.
rate.
Yeah,
And then we also assumed that there's we assumed a bunch of different things, a 3-year build out for the physical plant. And we'll get you a copy of this, Mike. And we're going to put this up on the board. So this is all public. And so we assumed a 3-year build out. We assumed a 40% initial take rate. We assumed that you'd have a relatively rapid adoption
okay,
up to a saturation level of 55 or 60%. And then you'd have a normal kind of 2 or 3% additional take rate years beyond.
okay.
And all those are consistent with what I've seen in the business.
So just continue here. So the dark fiber model under the findings did touch on the IRU, and as a way, if the public entity wanted to move forward with either option or the dark fiber particularly, that could utilize the IRU similar to what the Port of Bellingham is already doing to help shift costs and risks to a third party. And I believe we've talked about the IRU model already, so I won't go into what that all means unless you'd like me to, but they did call that out in the study as well. And Chris already mentioned that there was a very thorough analysis of our community. And just want to give a big shout out to the Port of Bellingham for their hard work in helping with the community outreach portion of the study. So it was very much a team effort in that regard. Did I miss anything on the high level findings before we move on, Chris?
No, I think we're good. So the next part is our recommendation on what to do about it. And what the study confirmed is that the path the Port of Bellingham started off on is probably the best path for us to pursue. Now, Bellingham is able to do a little bit of a lit model because they have their own co-location facilities and they have, some things to connect to, but a lot of what they're doing is dark. The area that we've targeted for the areas that we targeted for the future would be best served by a dark fiber model. And we would work in partnership with an ISP to fire them up. The other thing is, and again, this is consistent with what we've done in the past. We believe that we should max out our submissions and go for the gusto and get as much as we can for the folks of Whatcom County. And that's a fairly straightforward, since it's going to be grant funded, let's go for the biggest grants we can.
When you go through an area, residents be required to connect to this, or they have
No.
a choice?
They have a choice.
So you may go into an area and do one house and then have to travel who knows how far to do the next house instead of picking up every house along the way.
That's correct. And this model assumes constructing out, cost to construct out. It's one of those deals where there are people who don't want to be connected with the internet, or they're still on Twisted Pair AOL and they like that just fine. And they don't want to change. And that's okay. This doesn't coerce anybody into joining or anything like that. It's always an option. But we expect that over time, more and more people are going to want it. You'll end up with a very high saturation rate. It may take a decade to get there, but I think we'll get there eventually. And the point is to build the infrastructure out so that when the customer says, aha, I want to do this, they can. That you don't need to go back and spend, $500,000 to extend a line to them. It's done.
Or will there be an early price connection compared to a later price connection?
No.
So if someone says 5 years later, I want to be on that, they're going to pay the same as.
But remember, it's all grant funded up front. We're building all the infrastructure in up front. So the only thing that the customer's ever going to have to pay is the $100 or whatever the ISP charges to put the box in their house. Under any circumstance, that if we pursue this, that's the only option.
Didn't I read about a 13,500 per house connection?
That's if you take the number of grant dollars divided by the number of homes passed. That's where you end up with the $13,000. So that's what it would cost to serve every home in Whatcom County. The grant subsidizes that capital so that when a customer says, I want service, it only costs them whatever the ISP charges to put in the box. It's not going to have any infrastructure construction costs because that's already going to be there.
So the areas that were selected in the study were primarily selected based on our ability to apply for grants in those areas. Is that correct? Is that why we selected the areas we selected?
That's a really good way to describe it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, these are, in fact, the Andrew and Gina have done a ton of research, and the study area is actually our initial grant submission for the snowfall that just dropped yesterday. So that was we had made it coincidental.
Okay. I didn't, we got the report yesterday and I'm still digging into all of it, but both models are projected to make a small profit by the year, or to be
Cash positive.
cash positive by 2033. But with the lit model, the retail model, what your findings showed was that we would have to replace all the electronics
Mhm,
and that at year 10, and that cost would then put us in the red again,
absolutely. And there's no grant funding for it at that point,
as far as we know. at
as
this
far as we
point.
know.
Yeah, okay.
And you know, what you're looking at is the electronics at both ends is what changes, not the fiber in the middle.
Mhm.
And that's why you're not exposed to that if you're in a dark fiber model. Then it's just on the ISP, they're gonna have to upgrade. And think about, that's gonna be the migration from, 100 meg to gig to 10 gig.
Mhm.
And Xfinity is already selling 10 gig residential service in parts of the country. So it will be a matter of time. And what happens is you need to change out your light sources, your lasers at both ends. And you need broader spectrum, you need higher speeds, and so they change out the electronics at both ends when they convert to a higher speed. The dark fiber doesn't expose the PUD or the port to those upgrade costs in the future.
Okay.
That's on the ISP and they'll manage that competitively as they do today in most parts of the country. So essentially what this does is it converts areas of Whatcom County that are uneconomic for the ISPs to serve. And it knocks out the one thing that makes it economic, which is the upfront capital. And then the rest of it is a go.
Mhm. Okay.
So I guess the other thing, Commissioner, yesterday was the first day that you guys had your hands on this report.
Mhm.
We're not asking for any decisions from you guys today because our assumption is that you would get the report, read it, have an orientation on what staff took from the report, and then have time to digest it, ask further questions, and then we proceed at your pace.
Mhm. Okay.
Recognize that we do have a January 23rd deadline to drop our first application. So,
Oh, yeah.
so it's not, you don't have like 5 months to digest the thing, but it's not like I'm asking for a decision today.
Okay.
And we have a little bit of time.
Now, with Christine and even all Tool, I'm having trouble digesting all these costs, so much per house and so much for the grants, and we have to do so much, and then we have to replace so much in a period of 10 years. And we're gonna charge a smaller amount that I think, the number you gave, it was 7, did you say, per house?
Well, our bogey was that people have a charge of around $70 a month.
Right.
And in one of the models, I think we actually got it down to 55 a month. Is that right, Andrew? On the dark fiber model? I can't recall exactly now.
Well, my concern is,
So there's monthly charges, then there's upfront charges to customers, and those are different
and what I'm trying to have, I'm having trouble with is to balance out. If we don't make any revenue off of this,
Mhm.
then what's the future? Because it's gonna take revenue to continue on with this. We can't always guarantee grants are gonna be out there.
So on the dark fiber model, that's not true. You basically cover all the costs in the upfront, and then just minor leasing of the dark fiber itself pays for the maintenance of the whole system.
So all the
That you
dark
own.
fiber will be ran up front, and then it's just a matter of
And it
connecting.
generates enough internal funding to go to perpetuity. That's kind of what the study shows. The lit fiber or ISP model does not. At the end of 10 years, there's a capital investment that needs to be made, and there's no set aside for that. There's no, we don't charge more to have a retained capital to make the investment at the end. And that is just not in the model. If you did that, the rates would be higher.
What is the alternative if that something like that really happened? Would this public be put up for sale to whoever wants to buy it if we can't keep it going?
Well, so that would depend on whether it's us or the port that ultimately owns it. And the study was silent on that point. It just was a generic countywide organization. And the port would have the ability to, simply sell an asset that's not performing. They can do that. In our bylaws, it's different. You would have to have a vote of the people to liquidate out this utility. And it would be a telecom utility at that point. So we'd have to have the people of Whatcom County vote, and they could very well vote, no, you keep it. And then, we would either have to raise rates or find other sources of revenue to cover the system.
I hope you commissioners of the future will think this through, because I'd hate to see a black mark put against the PUD if a big mistake like that's made 10 years from now, and we can't support it. We should have something making us feel like, we can go on serving the community as long as the community chooses to have us there. But I'm not feeling comfortable, though I'm going to be out of here soon. I'm not feeling comfortable with a long-term solution. I don't see it right now. I mean, I can meet with you later, Chris, and we can talk, and you can try to bring me.
Sure.
But it just doesn't feel secure enough to go out forward.
Well, I feel that the dark fiber coupled with an IRU model completely insulates the PUD. We will have gotten an infrastructure built for our community that can be used by the ISPs to serve the community, and they will. And the infrastructure, because of the way you lease the fiber back to the ISPs that use it, it pays for itself. And the IRU off shifts the maintenance issues with the dark fiber and the lit fiber to a third party. So the costs and benefits of that are pushed off. So I think that, that's kind of the conclusion of the study, is that if you want to do this, the best way to do it is with a dark fiber model that's fully grant funded. And that means that none of your other customers end up subsidizing this, and you don't need any other, tax subsidy or anything like that. So that's the conclusion of the study.
And because the Port of Bellingham has taken the initial lead and we've joined in with them on this, the odds are is they're probably going to take the lead in ownership, I would imagine.
They have in the first IRU, and I believe in the second IRU, it's the same.
And that gives them the right that if they want to step away from this, for whatever reasons they choose, would that come to the PUD saying, do you want to buy us out?
Well, under the proposed terms of the second IRU, which is not fully executed yet, there's terms in there that would allow a right of first refusal to the ISP, and then they would simply sell it. And I would presume there'd be an at-market requirement even for the port. So they would have to get some kind of, if they went out beyond what was required in the contract in the IRU, they would have to do a public offering. And we'd be, able to bid on it if we wanted to.
So you're saying there's a chance that it could go from the public's hands into the private hands at that time?
As I understand the IRU that's being negotiated today, yes. And it would be in public hands for 25 years. Do I have that right, Andrew, or did they go and change the language to make it public to perpetuity?
No, your understanding is same as mine. At the end of the 25 years, the asset reverts to private ownership through some sort of sale on the second.
That's what the first one.
The second one.
This is
The
with the
first
second
one,
one
auto.
too, that they've done recently.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, and remember, it's not fully executed yet
Okay.
between the port and the ISP that they're negotiating with.
Commissioner Deshmani has a hand up.
Thank you.
Commissioner,
Can you hear me okay?
yes.
Okay. So first was a question to you, Chair, and the Commission. And that is that we're not deliberating here on any decision today. We've just received the study. There's a lot to discuss. And I'm wondering if how much we want to discuss it today, on our agenda. And because I could see having a lot of conversation today on this subject, not even having reviewed the details of the study. And so I'm kind of thinking through this and wondering how much we want to talk about today and how much we want to talk about this in a subsequent meeting.
I think that's a really good question. The other piece of information we got yesterday is that the state broadband office dropped the notice of funding opportunity. Correct, Andrew?
Yes.
Yes.
Chris, yeah. So now, I mean, we've been waiting for 8, almost 9 months for that. And that came yesterday and the report was finalized. So it was a big day yesterday for broadband, which is great. But like you said, Chris, we have 2 months to get our application in.
Roughly.
And I don't know what's all involved in that, but I'm guessing the earlier we can give staff direction, the better to start preparing that grant application. So,
Well, I think that, staff, and I say staff, Andrew and Gina have done a ton of work on the grant application that's behind the area that's in the telecom study.
mhm,
And Andrew has done a ton of additional work on, possible additional areas as we've looked for LUD candidates and things like that. The fiber, fabric data that just came out from the federal government highlights a whole bunch of other opportunities. So, I would just, we're not going to wait. So you guys, you go, we're going to proceed. And if it ends up being an effort in a future grant application, not this round, that's okay. It's not a wasted effort. So it's not that we've hit the ground running, it's that we've been running for the last 8 months and we're going to continue.
mhm.
So would I understand that? I mean, there's only really 2 more meetings left after today, 2 meetings, possibly December, maybe 1. I'm not sure what you're going to request. But I thought you said by the 1st of January, you need to make a hard decision.
The 23rd. So
Oh, the 23rd.
Yeah, it'd be either the first or second.
So we
meeting
have,
in
you
January.
roughly have 3 more meetings planned, scheduled meetings or special meetings to discuss this.
Right.
Okay, so
Okay.
let me just talk a little bit about context and if we can go to Andrew, to the slide on the assumptions going in. Okay, so there's, slides have to be readable. But if this was an accurate representation of assumptions, it'd be very, very long. And I'm glad of what you put in here, but I want to talk about some of the things that are not on the slide. And even if they're not some assumptions, they're important considerations about where we're at. For example, Whatcom PD has no revenue associated with broadband. So we don't have anything to quote unquote reinvest or to work with from that direction. We have already taken several steps down the road, and our staff has the support of the commission in this low-hanging fruit, which I've called it several times, strategy of serving the unserved. And we have both internally from the commission and from the Ports Commission received repeated questions about, well, why don't you guys consider doing retail? Well, towards a prior objective of serving those that are unserved, we're taking reasonable action, taking advantage of the current realities of grant funding to come up with a way to expand the number of people that are served in the most effective manner possible. So that we not only have a near-term strategy, we have plans and we have actions that are already underway. But at the same time, a study to look at retail, I wonder how beneficial it is if it's defining retail only in the context of these near-term actions to serve the underserved. Doesn't mean that is a mistake to do this study, Chris. I'm just saying that for me, it's not answering the questions that I have about retail service. So I appreciate that this study does try to take advantage of an opportunity we have with all this state funding and federal funding to, hey, if there's a way we can incorporate retail in what we're doing and start creating a retail footprint, then this study does help evaluate that. But I worry that whenever you try to answer a question in a certain constrained manner, obviously you have to realize the answers you get are very dependent on the assumptions you had when you went in. So I think we have our assumptions going on are very limiting as far as properly analyzing the benefit of retail, particularly when we're talking about the benefit of retail by a public organization, the benefits to the public. Another part of these assumptions that's very important to realize is that we're looking about risk to the organization of the PUD. And of course, as a commissioner of the PUD, it's my responsibility to, and all of our responsibility to look after the health and minimize risk for the PUD. However, and when we are looking at something like retail, just like, frankly, by looking at providing dark fiber service, it's an incremental function that the PUD is providing. And by providing that incremental function, we are by definition exposing the organization to risk. So in the same way, to me, retail is like adding a new chapter to what the PUD does. And then deciding, well, how can we fit that in a reasonable manner into the portfolio of activities we have. So, for example, there's possibility that once we have a somewhat of an installed footprint, that we can look at providing retail service not just on our wires, but perhaps on other wires or the city's wires. So one of the things that I'd like us to consider is how much we're narrowing the question by putting these assumptions in and recognizing that we're already beneficially, constructively down a dark fiber pathway. And instead think about what are all the ways we can create openings in what we're doing in our agreements with telecoms to create the room for us to be a retail service provider at some point. That's not really what the study is about, but these are kinds of, I want to maybe spawn new studies or spawn new investigations. I'm not sure we need to hire how much we need to hire third parties for that, Chris, to leave open the question of how to make retail viable for the PUD and then of course beneficial to the community. And I would say to a significant degree, those questions lie outside this study.
So you probably raised 100 points in what you just said, and I'm not going to try and address all of them, but I want to address a few. First of all, the risk for a dark fiber model is mitigated by the steps that are recommended in this study. The risks for a retail model are not in any way mitigated by these actions and would be at least an order of magnitude larger, if not more. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, yes, we did constrain this study to look at areas where we could get grant funding. The reason for that is, barring grant funding, we would have to raise that capital amount somewhere else.
Yes.
And logically, that would be in revenue bonds, for instance. And then to recover those revenues from retail customers, we would end up with charges that are much larger than what are considered competitive today in the ISP world. The reason that they're competitive today in the ISP world is because the ISPs do not serve these customers, which would be very much higher incremental cost. The other thing to think about here is in Whatcom County, unlike most counties where you've had public broadband as an option, 90% of the service is already provided by existing ISPs. There's only about 7,500 customers out of over 88,000 that are not served. The problem that you face in building a business here is that the good customers, the ones that are low cost to serve and likely to pay, are already taken. That is just a fundamental reality that we've got here. And what we're trying to do is reach those customers with infrastructure so that the ISPs can go ahead and serve them competitively. The comment that I got from Vince, who's a local representative for Comcast, was really
I know
simple.
Vince.
You know, we talked about competitiveness and, you know, open access and everything else. And he said, look, the competition that Comcast faces is nationwide. So they offer a flat charge in all of their markets, and it's driven by nationwide massive competition. And they're not going to offer a different charge to a customer here if they can serve them through existing infrastructure. So, you know, in a sense, when you deal with these larger ISPs, you're benefiting from competition that occurs at a very, very high level. And so, yes, this study was constrained. So we looked at areas where we could get grant funding. And the reason was that's the most cost-effective way to serve the unserved customers of Whatcom County.
So, yeah, I understand that, and I'm on point with your point about why we did what we did. I said it in my comments. I'm gonna repeat again. I'm not saying we made a mistake in doing this study. I'm just saying that we have to be careful about how far we take the implications, the conclusions of this. And so what this conversation stimulates in me is the question, how does Whatcom PUD go about the process of evaluating whether we do retail service? That's the open question I have now, because it's not, that question is a much broader question than what we answered in this study. For example, there will be and there have been other opportunities for public sector companies to pursue retail. And we have other sources of funding that might be interested in helping us provide that service.
Like what?
Well, certainly there's the foundations, and of course, long before the COVID-related funding, there was Chris, what's his name's organization that we've both talked to on numerous occasions, not Open Software Foundation.
Institute for Local Self-Reliance?
Yeah. ILS, and they have on their website studies of public sector ISPs forming and making a go of it and making a success of it. And it is, I mean, being a startup entrepreneur, I mean, all startup efforts are moronic. I can certify that almost all startups in established industries are moronic, and most of them fail. So I'm in no way saying that we should just carelessly delve into this space. However, there are now case studies of public sector entities entering the retail space and making a success of it. So I think that what this study does is helps us understand that a minor, I'm imagining a running back on a field, a minor juke or to turn a 5-yard play into a 25-yard play is not, it's not gonna, the math here probably doesn't support that. But I'm also arguing that, you know, making those much deeper penetration in the public sector culture in our community and having a much bigger impact on how data is delivered in this county, which would be a public sector retail enterprise. That long game, that big play is going to take a lot more thought than what this study produced.
I have one other, I guess, question that I'd love for either Andrew or Chris to comment on, and that's, you know, historically, the funding for broadband in our country has come from the federal level, and it's gone directly to private telecoms. And there's been a real lack of oversight in terms of how that money has been used. Underserved communities have remained underserved while private telecoms have made huge profits. There's been a shift in the last few years in terms of how that money is flowing. going to our state broadband office, and now it's moving into local communities. So if you look prior to 2019, there were no public agencies in Whatcom County working on broadband. So how would you characterize the change in local control that we would have, even if we just did a dark fiber route that we didn't have prior to 2019, or even prior to kind of this new approach to broadband funding that we've seen in the post-COVID era?
Well, the fundamental change came, as Andrew pointed out, going from middle mile to final mile. And that came as a result of recognizing that people that were stranded at their homes because of COVID needed to have broadband access for education, for commerce, for everything else. And that was the kind of aha moment at the federal level. So they really redirected the money to the states with the intent that the states fund final mile infrastructure construction. And that's literally how these grants are structured. So, you know, the idea is if you build the infrastructure, if you build the highway out there, then the ISPs will light it up and serve customers competitively. And that's in fact what's been funded. Can I go back and make another comment? Commissioner Deshmani, I would challenge you to show me a case study where you've got a public entity that is in a 90% served area that does not own the poles that they're hanging the fiber on, where they ended up being competitive. You will not find it. It's not the case. And in fact, when you look at Tacoma, where they had all that back in the 90s, they were unserved, they owned the poles, and they decided to run fiber to all the premise. They did that. And now 25, 30 years later, they're dropping out of that market because they're not competitive. They don't have the critical mass to be competitive. They only have 200,000 customers, only 200,000 customers, and they can't compete with the big guys, and they're getting out of the business. The ISPs are, you know, they're big national companies, and they are fierce competitors. They're actually good at what they do. It's not an oligopoly or anything like that. There's a whole bunch of them, and they're you know, tooth and nail at each other. So what we're trying to do is provide the infrastructure so that they serve the end use customers.
So Chris, I appreciate the challenge. I won't take you up on the challenge because I didn't make that assertion. And I don't think I'm not quite ready to start up another company, but I've addressed similar types of challenging questions, certainly, and in my past, and have had been successful at times and not. So it's not about me. It's about what's in the interest of the community and for how the PUD to figure out how to serve that community. And it could be that answering that bigger question that I'm posing may produce a infeasibility or very limited financial feasibility as far as what whether, you know, serving these exclusively outlying areas might mean. But, you know, one of the things I think I've commented before is that the public sector increasingly is in the mode of subsidizing the private sector. And what I mean by that is that the private sector decides who they want to serve and how they can make money on it, and then leaves and doesn't serve the people that are not economic. And then that the ball is in the hands of the public sector, whether we're talking about broadband or healthcare, to fill the gap. And you know, one of the things that's inherent in being able, like for example, in electric service or in water service, we the spreading of economic return and risk is kind of how a utility works. So sorry to say it, I don't know if Vince is listening to this meeting, but if we're going to go into retail, we're going to have to eat some of his lunch. Nothing, you know, nothing personal. We can't do it by 100% relying on expensive customers to serve. we're gonna have to eat some of the lunch of the private sector ISPs. And I'm not saying I'm committed to doing that. I'm just saying that the study needs to look at that. Needs to look at serving some of the high margin customers in order to be able to afford to serve some of the low or negative margin customers. That's kind of the way it works. Otherwise, we're just in the business of providing subsidy to those that the private sector can't make money on. And that is too much what government does.
That is, however, what the federal government has decided to do in this case.
Yes.
So I think one of my priorities is that we don't leave grant money on the table. When I think about what is in the best interest of the 230,000 Whatcom County residents out there that don't even know the difference between, you know, all these terms we're talking about, I think that what the average Whatcom County resident would say is get out there and apply for the grant funding to bring better infrastructure to our county. So I don't want to spend more, I don't want to waste another year doing more studies and leave grant money on the table. That doesn't mean that I think the questions you're asking are important ones, Commissioner Dashmani, but I think we need to think about how we proceed without letting those questions slow us down. And January 23rd will be here before we know it. And our staff have put a lot of work into getting us prepared to apply for these grants. And it's not perfect, but I do think that the dark fiber model isn't just subsidizing the private sector. It is a publicly owned piece of infrastructure that we lease to the private ISPs and that we have control over in a way that we wouldn't have had before. So we do have some teeth. And one of the things I would really want to understand more about is I want to have a longer discussion about what the IRU would look like, whether that question of transferring ownership and how, you know, how we address that, and also service level agreements. How do we make sure that these private ISPs that are using the dark fiber network are, you know, truly providing the service that they say they are, that they're keeping it affordable. And I know we have some great models from, you know, Kitsap service level agreements and things like that. So that's where I see our power to shape this market is.
And in the new and improved IRU, which is based on the Petrichor model, and Andrew can speak to this in great detail, but there are clauses in there around SLAs. There are clauses in the, service level agreements. There are clauses around expected rates. So, you know, that's where you get it, is through the IRU.
Mm-hmm.
And that's literally, you know, kind of the new and improved version.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to pursue an IRU that was subject to PUD's oversight, you know, it would look probably different than what the port is looking for, because they're a different organization.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have different drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So to bring it all to a head, from as far as near-term actions, for those who didn't see all of my body language, I'm wholeheartedly agreeing with you, Commissioner Grant, on not leaving money on the table, maximizing the amount of investment in Whatcom County, and not allowing answering the bigger questions to interfere with our near-term actions, to putting in submissions for dark fiber expansion. So with one important exception, and that is continuing to tweak the IRU to maximize local control in the public sector. Mm-hmm. And repeating again what I said in my comments, that thinking about leaving some room in the IRUs for us to become an entrant at some point in the future if we deem it appropriate.
I understand your input. Remember, an IRU is a contract between a governmental organization and a private organization, and both parties have to agree. So if you're telling somebody that, hey, I want you to pay for all this, but in 5 years I may take away your business, you're reducing their inclination to agree. And there's nothing that forces them to agree. So
There's no
an IRU, just to be clear, it's a negotiated contract between two parties.
And having done many contracts, I understand that when you provide something and that you take something back in the contract, you provide consideration for taking it back. So that's John's job.
Okay.
But John knows that.
Okay, I wanna. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, but I just want to say that John and then you, Chris, you guys know intimately how that works. That, okay, if I'm going to give you control of this and I want an option to have it back, then I'm going to give you something for that. I understand that, Chris.
It's still the business discussion and the
Right.
terms.
Right. Which I understand as well.
Yeah, it's quite possible to get parameters to negotiate a contract that you can never get an agreement on. Just be aware, you have to be careful about that.
Yep.
So I would characterize what's coming out of this feasibility study as a recommendation of a no regret strategy, that regardless of what else you want to do in the future, this doesn't hurt. And going for maximum grants to get the infrastructure built is, I think, a really good idea. And that's what came out of this feasibility study.
How do we want to, so the other thought that I wanted to get input from both the commissioners on is, we do have another public comment session here today. Do we, and I sent the report out to the TAG Northwest group yesterday. I think trying to get input from community members on this is great, and I hope we get some during our final, our public comment at the end of the meeting today. Do we want to engage the public in any other way on this report as we look forward for what what our plans are for our grant applications?
Well, I would just suggest that, number one, this is new information for virtually everybody. So our next round of old business in our first December meeting will cover this. And I think what we need to do is just kind of recognize that maybe we ought to have an open public comment period in the middle of old business next time.
That's a good idea.
And
Okay.
go ahead and, then all the people who are out there and interested, they can zoom in, they can come in person, we can hear from them.
Okay, right, so that people, so basically a public comment,
Yeah,
like right now in the meeting.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, I think does that sound like a good idea to both so put this under old business for our
Yeah.
next meeting? And then have a kind of open discussion then. And then obviously we have public comment at the end of this meeting too, if folks want to do that. So I guess my wanting to put a pin in this so we can move on to other topics, but Chris, and Andrew, what else do you need from the commission and when do you need it? When are we making what can you characterize the decision that you need from the commission on any
I
of
think,
this?
really the next meeting, if you guys have had a chance to digest this, and we need a kind of a go, no go from you guys for pursuing the grants. And the other piece out there is the notice of funding opportunity, the NOFO that dropped yesterday. It's about 16 pages. It's not that onerous to get through.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll forward it out to you, and you can also forward that to interested groups. And you know, given the context of the NOFO and what we know about IRUs and our study, you know, really, we just need the head nod from you guys to proceed.
Okay,
And we'll go flat out and max out what we can get in terms of grant applications.
okay. And Andrew, can you go back to the staff recommendation slide? Yeah,
So it's really the third bullet point or the third item there.
Okay, I just have a couple questions. It's
go
about the-
ahead.
It's about the NOFO. Is there anything in the NOFO that's specifically catered to or encouraging of retail for public sector ISPs?
No, quite the opposite. It deals with simple construction of infrastructure.
I mean, so one of the things we didn't talk about, but I think all of us understand, but it doesn't hurt for the benefit of the public to be mentioned here, is that the construction and service of dark fiber is a low overhead activity as compared to retail. So if the NOFO itself doesn't provide support for ongoing variable cost and services cost related allocation, it's naturally going to favor dark fiber.
Actually, Commissioner, that's not true. It specifically calls out as excluded a lot of activities that would be required to be an ISP. It specifically excludes them,
I think that's what I
such
said.
as, well, it doesn't exclude them by omission. It excludes them explicitly. It's written in the NOFO that these costs shall not be covered. And then it goes boom, boom, boom. So it's,
Right,
you
so
know,
by doing that,
it's different.
but
Go
I'm
ahead.
not, what I'm trying to say here, Chris, is that the NOFO is not a pro retail public sector ISP, NOFO.
That's correct. It's meant to get infrastructure to the final mile out there.
So that's some important, commissioners, that's an important thing. The state broadband office has an implied objective in the NOFO itself. So another reason why our current study scope is quite limited. I'm just trying to make that point again, Chris. is that
Yeah,
We,
Yeah, we
Are
tried to tailor this to
answering-
get grant money.
right, so we're answering, it's really important that the public not in any way think that retail, not retail, in the context of this narrowly defined task that we're undertaking is an answer to the broader questions about retail.
right. And I
That's
think
all.
we're at the end of the food chain when it comes to decisions about how grant money is used. We have to adjust our strategy based on the granting agencies that we're dependent on. I think which I think we're all saying the same thing.
Okay, so
And I
I've
will
got,
know my frustration.
Oh,
So I will, and for public consumption, I am frustrated with the NOFO itself. There are some minor tweaks from last year's and it took them 9 months to drop this. I'm very, very frustrated. This was an unnecessary, in my opinion, delay. Shouldn't have happened. We should already have had this discussion long ago and grant applications in and construction contracts being bid and, you know, getting fiber out there to the public. And I'm very, very frustrated.
no, and I agree with you, Chris, on that, and I think you're absolutely right. Looking at the silver lining is basically what I thought when you sent the email yesterday about the NOFO being dropped was that there was an attempt by the state broadband office to restructure the NOFO based on lobbying by private sector ISPs, and it didn't succeed.
mhm,
It's very
And,
positive in that sense.
mhm.
I also want to say, I really, I'm taking some liberties here. And I know, Chair, you want to wrap up, but I need to say this. In more, in other industries and other growth of industries. We said there's this public policy objectives, and public policy objectives get translated into money. And what happens when the money starts flowing, it changes the questions. And I think we're seeing that here. I've seen that many times in the field of renewable energy and in other industries as well. And what that does is it forces us to forget some of the original questions. And one of those, I pose one of those original questions. How does the public sector participate? How do we consider the possibility of becoming a retail ISP? I'm not sure that whether it's an unstoppable trend, but I'd like us to try to answer that question at some point. Because it's a very important question, and it's one that I need to have answered. I'm just saying is that because there's money, it's affecting the way we're going about solving the problem. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be smart, but it's also forcing us to overlook certain things that deserve our attention too. So having said that, the questions I ask, I don't want to interfere with the dark fiber expansion that we're in the middle of, but I don't want to forget those questions.
You had a question about a public comment.
Yeah, so we just got a comment through the chat about having a public comment about this right now. And
We have a second one on the
we
agenda.
do have a second one on the agenda after our other business.
Historically, it's been the chair's discretion to receive public comment, like when Rick wants to speak on a topic on the agenda. This commission's tended to go away from that as a practice and just park the comments at the beginning, at the end. Historically, it's been the commission has generally deferred to the chair to whether it would receive comments on a specific item. And you control the extent of that discussion, because it could become unwieldy.
And however, also is once you start a practice, you have to continue it on for everybody.
That's kind of
Okay, so why don't we do this? Why don't we have our public comment that we typically have at the end of the meeting, and then in our next meeting, have a public hearing about broadband on this topic. That's what I'm going to propose that we do.
I like that.
Okay. Let's move on to our new business, if everyone's okay with that. And thank you to Andrew and Chris, Noanette, Petrichor, Port of Bellingham. I know a lot of people worked hard on this report, so thank you. So moving on to new business, we'll be looking at the 2023 draft budget. And I'll look to you, Chris, to take from here.
So I would just like to introduce Annette, and she has a presentation to walk us through, and take it away, Annette.
Annette?
Annette, you're probably muted. She is muted.
I am sorry about that. I just knocked my cord and it blacked out my screen for a moment. Let me
No
get
problem.
here to where I was. I had it all set up and everything.
So just by way of background, we have an introduction meeting where we kind of daylight the budget. And then we have a follow-up meeting, which occurs after we talk to customers and got input. This is that second follow-up meeting. This is still a draft budget, and we'll be asking you to approve a budget next month. And so this represents our best current thinking about investments we're going to need to make and spending we're going to need to do next year.
Okay.
Do you want to take a short? Go ahead. Okay. So Annette, with that preamble, go ahead and take it away.
All right. I am still, let's try this. Sorry, I had it all set up and then it does not want to cooperate right now. Let's try this. See if it'll go big screen.
That's looking good.
Okay. Is that, do you see the,
We can see okay. I mean, we can see it. Is that okay for,
Or you can go down to the presentation mode in that, down at the
I'm
bottom
sorry?
where it's got the, you can go to the presentation
fine.
mode.
I'm fine. But
there you
There you
go.
go.
there we go. We can see that? Okay. Sorry about that.
Yes.
I moved my laptop and it unhooked. So like Chris said, our standard budget process is we go through the draft budget and kind of show you where we're at. And then we get comments back from you and also from our customers. And then we incorporate that into a final draft budget. And that's what we're presenting today. So that's what we're showing. So this is very similar to the draft budget that we had previously. It's a little longer. And then at the end, we'll go over the rates and the forecast. But it will go, a lot of it will go quickly because a lot of it hasn't changed too much. And then like we did with the draft budget, the budget is available online and it's now marked as a final draft on our website. So this is has been updated. This all through this whole presentation and now includes the October actuals. So all the 2022 projected have shifted a little bit. And then down at the bottom in the blue, you can see what the draft presentation numbers were. And so overall, it's dropped a little bit. The biggest one in the industrial water is the electrical general service charge dropped. In the Grandview, our capital transfers dropped, and then in electric, there wasn't much of a change, but the electric power costs at the top dropped, but the capital transfers at the bottom increased, so there was some offset there. And then as you can see, like I said, the 2022 projected has changed, has actually dropped. Any questions on that slide? Okay, this is where we went into a little bit more detail on some of our operating costs. The two slides over on the side, or the two tables over on the side, the business projects and the business services, those have not changed at all. The two on the left side, the admin and the outside services, the 2022 obviously have changed, and the 2023 have changed, but not significantly or not materially at all there. Any questions on that one? All right, the operating budget, this one has changed some. We were able to hire Jacob as our automation technician, which we had listed down below as a potential new hire. He started November 1st and has been a good addition. So he's included up at top at the 2022 forecasted head count. And then we're looking for 4 people in 2023. We're currently out on the market, like I said, for the project manager, but the other 3 we have not gone out, I do not believe yet. And of those 3 down at the bottom, you can see the yellow highlighted ones, and those are replacements for either retired positions or potentially coming up retired positions. The costs have increased here. We updated the COLA. The union is tied to the CPIW, and so we got the most updated one there, and that increased. And then that translates across to our non-represented employees, increasing there. And then also built into this is I said this, and it's the same as the draft. We are increasing our pension contribution to employees over 3 years to get up to where PERS is, so we can be more competitive in our hiring. Any questions on that? All right, capital budget. So obviously the 2022 projected has changed some. The only other change that we have on this slide is in DVP 6, the line crossing at Grandview Road, that bottom yellow highlighted line. Originally in the draft budget, that was at 375. We are able to pretty confidently drop that down to 100. So that will help. And just as a reminder, those 3 highlighted yellow ones under Grandview, we are looking to finance those because Grandview does not have enough in reserves through an interfund loan with Electric Capital. And so the lower that those costs are, the lower that the Grandview will have to borrow. And that was one reason. Number one, it was a lower dollar amount. Number two, the costs of what these 3 projects are going to be are a little gray, let's say, currently. So that would give us the flexibility to adjust to that. All right, reserves. Commissioner Murphy had commented that, very rightly so, that we need to start looking at emergency. I looked at their emergency reserves because it had been the same. And I looked back, and when I came in 2006, it was at the 350 level. So we definitely need to increase that. So what I did is I just increased at 5,000. And I know that's just basically a drop in the bucket, but rates were looking pretty high. So I didn't want to do too much to be pushing the rates up. But what I've done is the next several years, I've forecasted in an increase of $8,000 per year. Also with this, I've rebalanced the reserve. It's based on capital assets. And so over the years, you know, one utility has had more capital assets added than another. So I rebalanced that. So, but this will be brought to you in each of the budget sessions in the following years. So if that 8,000 is too low, too much, we can adjust it at that point. But right now, that's what's in the forecast.
So Annette, are you basically suggesting that this is something we're going to have a rate of increase in the emergency reserves year over year from here on out? And I'm just making a note of that.
Well, that's my recommendation currently. That's up to you, and each year you can make a different decision. You know,
would it be helpful at this point, Annette, to get input from the commission on that general notional increase?
Well, what I'm looking for right now is $5,000 okay for this year, and then next year, you know, we could be in a whole different scenario financially and economically, and then we can decide at that point.
Okay.
So Commissioner Deshmani, when you think about emergencies, it's the ability to ride through a kind of a catastrophic event without having to have an emergency rate increase to raise funds. And the dig-in that happened on our high pressure line at the time cost over $300,000. In fact, I think it was around $350,000. And that was many years ago. If we had to call a contractor out to do the repairs today, probably be double that, maybe even triple. So you could be looking at $750,000 or $1 million. That's just a hit, and we'd have to find cash. We'd probably have an emergency rate increase. I mean, what we're trying to do is avoid that over time. So the other part is that I believe in incremental changes in rates, not sudden sharp ones. And I think it's prudent at this point for us to increase what we have set aside for emergency reserves. I don't have a great sense as to how fast we can do that. And probably there'll be years where we're not looking at any rate increases, any rate pressures, and we could go larger. But 5,000 we were able to get that in without disturbing rates any more than they already are.
Well, so why I'm bringing this up, Chris, thank you. And thank you for that explanation. Why I'm bringing this up is that, and I feel shy to say that I'm 4 years into this now and I'm bringing this up now. But anyway, I'm recognizing now that with budgets, there's some multi-year policies that affect budgets and their evolution year to year. And I'm wondering if we should have a process by which we look at those types of things, maybe either as part of approving the budget or separate from approving the budget. Maybe those should be a strategic planning update discussion, but I'm just bringing those things up and something for you all to consider, you and Annette to consider in terms of how to handle year over year type of shifts in our budgeting approach.
So I think that the most critical thing that we can do as a utility is look at the long-term needs of our customers. That's best accomplished through the strategic plan. One of the elements in this year's strategic plan update was to adopt an asset management approach to everything. And that really is exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
It's looking at the long-term asset needs, forecasting out, that really is the budget policy, if you will.
Great.
If it's an asset management organization, that drives your funding for the long term.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Thanks for that discussion.
All right, so the next slide is our long-term debt. This has changed. That 64 million that we're looking at issuing in the next several years has dropped. And I have another slide coming up, the next one that will explain a little bit why. But I did want to see a visual down below of what we're looking at in debt service and quite a big increase with those two bond issues. Now, when we do a debt issue, there's a possibility that we can shape it a bit. And I would probably look at maybe, pushing some of that principal payment out a little bit, so there's not such a huge increase. But in doing that, you also will increase your interest costs. So, there's some flexibility we do have there. Questions on that?
So, well, one thing on the long-term debt, I've had talk with a couple of commissioners that are, they're kind of concerned about single customer exposure, and this debt is driven by a large capital investment that's predicated on existing flow needs, and so that's a real risk. And not to downplay that at all, what we need to do is well, several things. One is we always need to make sure that before we make any investment like this, especially as big as Plant 1, that we have the timing of it right. And part of that is the engineering that we're going to be doing up front. The other part of it is that we've got to have commitments from our customers that they'll be here for the long run for that type of expenditure. That we can cover at least partially through the contracts that each one of these customers we have negotiated with. So that's kind of the good news. The bad news is that the largest customers are in the 2077, 2028, 2029 timeframe. So we have existing contracts with them that cover beyond where we want to begin reconstructing this. So I guess the good news is we're not issuing bonds today. And we are going to be having this discussion over the next 2 or 3 years as we get closer to issuing the bonds and figure out a way that we can, make sure that we're able to recover the costs, because that's what we are as a cost recovery agency. And so I want to thank the commissioners for bringing that up and getting it out there in public. It's something that Annette and I have talked about and worried about, but privately. And it's very appropriate that be brought out as a concern, long-term concern.
Thanks.
All right, so this is a new slide for this presentation, but I wanted to include it just as a little bit of an explanation of why our expected debt has dropped, but then our rates going out have increased. And part of our financial policy that we have is that we try and target 1.5 debt service coverage. And so the debt service coverage, in just real quick high level, is basically you take your revenue, you minus your expenses, and how many times is that available, that net balance will cover your existing debt that you have owed for that year. And so in 2024 and 2026, when we issued those bonds, that was dropping below the 1.5. So I had to increase the expected rates in those years going out. Now, again, you know, if the debt amount that we issue or the timing changes, that will also issue. And then the actual for the debt service coverage, you know, that'll change depending on what the actual revenue and expenses come in as, but we try and budget to that 1.5. Does that make sense? And then this is the strategic plan slide, and this has not changed at all from our draft budget. So taking the high level bullet points of our strategic plan and then listing out underneath those the projects that we have and the dollars associated with each one of those. All right, a numbers break. So this is a picture from roughly about a year ago when we had flooding in the Nooksack River. And just a reminder of flooding and frazzle ice season is upon us. So hopefully we will manage again this year. So our industrial rates, what I presented to the customers for the industrial system was at 8.8, and we've worked on that and we're able to get that down to a 7.1. But that covers the industrial, the irrigation, and then we have a relatively new section called the temporary water connection, which is mainly contractors that contact us in the summers to get temporary water for dust control there. The Grandview rates, unfortunately, the Grandview did jump a little bit from the customer presentation. It was at 7.3. It's now at 7.7. And the cause of that was updating the usage. The usage at Grandview has dropped down to roughly about 88% this year over last year. And so the revenue we need to recover is the same, but what it's spread out over is a smaller amount. But the big nice news of this presentation is electric rates. I had originally presented like double-digit increase, and it just wasn't making sense. But I found there was some cash that went to the capital fund instead of the operating fund. And what was driving it was the increase was keeping it above the minimum reserves there. So once I found that, we were able to drop the rates down to 5%. But I just want to remind everyone that when I say electric rate increase or decrease or whatever, that is just the general service portion of the invoice. We pass through the power, the transmission, and the taxes directly from what we are charged to Phillips 66. So it's only on our little piece where we get reimbursed.
So on the Annette, on the customer budget meetings, I attended both of them. What I was struck by is how customers were, and I want to share with the commission too, that customers are completely quiet. Is that normal, or did that have anything to do with me? Did you get subsequent feedback? And you don't have to name anybody, but did you get subsequent feedback after those meetings?
I did not get subsequent feedback. You know, our customer meetings we actually probably have more attending now that it's online, but they do not comment as much as when they're in person. And a lot of times when they were in person, the comments weren't necessarily about budget. It was about just general facility or utility questions of, hey, I see you working over here. What's going on? You know, things in that nature. But, you know, I think being online, I know in other meetings that I'm in, they do not like it online. Well, participate in the perms. They try and get everybody in-house because they get more feedback and more interaction when you're face-to-face. But as far as feedback, we really didn't get any.
So the electric rates are less because we ourselves figured out that the increase wasn't necessary.
Correct.
Thank you.
This is a high level going out forecast, and then you can see, I mean, the biggest one to call out is at the upper left is those two big mountains. And that's the cash balances when we issue those bonds. And then they are spent down quite quickly if we keep the same schedule that we have right now on that capital projects. And so you can see the expenses and the rates expected to be where they are, or the rate revenue going out. And then our final piece on getting the rates and the budget approved will be during the first meeting in December. There will be several resolutions that'll be brought before you at it, just reflecting the numbers that are in this presentation and then approving those resolutions, and then they'll go into effect in our January business. Any questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I don't have it wasn't quite as cool as Andrew's cool background, but hopefully it wasn't too painful, 2 presentations in a row.
Thanks, Annette.
Yeah, thanks, Annette.
Commissioners, any other questions?
Yeah,
Okay,
speaking for myself, I was
all right.
in the budget presentation. So Annette, thanks for making it very informative.
I'm glad.
And we'll see you on December 13th
Yes, thank you.
for our final budget and rate approval. So our next item is the public hearing for the 2023 draft budget. So I guess at this time we just take public comment, correct? Okay. We've got a public comment here in the room.
Somebody with an allergy to dogs.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, Robert Dexter isn't here, so we can't make this as extensive as it would ordinarily be. Actually, I did have a question on the reserves. You know, the listing here, it's quite clear from most of them exactly what they're for. But I just wanted to remind me that the 1.5% of capital assets, what is that money actually to be used for?
That's usually for when capital projects go over, or if all of a sudden, I mean, we have an emergency and we have to repair a capital piece, then we can combine that with our emergency reserves and hopefully cover that. I mean, when
In
we,
a competitive firm, it would be working capital.
So basically that is, those are reserves that could be in a very short time frame be used to cover emergencies. So in a reality, on the very short term, your reserves for emergencies are really 1.355 million. And of course, you have other recourses for funding for making repairs that will come in over a longer period of time. For example, insurance, bond funding if you have to, rate increases and whatnot. So I think when looking at emergency reserves, you need to look at both of those together to determine how much you've got for a really short-term emergency reserve. The other comment that I had is reply to a comment that Chris made, and that is the long-term risk to a very small customer base. And I would point out that from my past experience, the business case for those customers staying there is actually quite strong for a fair amount of time into the future. The major risk to them as customers is not a business risk. It is a political risk. Those two major customers are oil refineries, and there is a huge push around just to have them go away completely on a short-term basis. So that's the risk. It's something that needs to be dealt with on a political level. That's it.
Thank you, Rick. And we've had that conversation internally. Just, appreciate that is also out there. I do want to point out that the working capital, the 1.5% of capital assets, when we pay a contract in a given month in a year, we don't have the money budgeted. That's recovered through the entire year. So you need to have a working capital fund just to meet your lumpy monthly expenses. And that's really what this 1.5% of assets is for. The emergency fund is for those deviations that happen that are above and beyond what you had budgeted. So you've got to figure that in the course of the year, you can have, for instance, legal expenses could be very lumpy. We could have public records requests that we didn't anticipate. Other things that are going to draw down the working capital fund. The emergency is truly for that. It's for something that you just didn't foresee at all, and it's not in the budget, and it suddenly occurs. So I thank you for the observation. And yes, some of the working capital is used in the emergency, but the emergency should be a standalone, not used as a working capital fund.
Commissioner Deshmani, did you want to comment on Rick's comment?
I just wanted to thank Rick. I think that was such a helpful, thoughtful comment, and thank Rick for that. And add to this point of recognizing that who we currently are in terms of organization, who we currently serve, and recognizing that our growth has to be done in a manner that at the same time recognizes who we've been and who we currently are. So what we do next can certainly be an expansion of the customers and is an expansion of the customers. But it's important to know where you've been, who you are, and define what you do next in the context of that. And so this point of risk is really something for me to ponder further on, and appreciate the comment from Rick.
I do want to point out that in our strategic plan, one of the things that we put in there deliberately is the best way to mitigate single customer risk is to grow customers. And we are committed to doing that on both the water and the electric side. And that's the very best long-term way to mitigate risk to all existing customers is to have more customers.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands or folks at the microphone here in the room. So unless I see one in the next few seconds here, I'm going to close the public hearing. Okay, the public hearing on the draft 2023 budget is closed. The next item under new business is the approval of amendment of employment contract with Steve Joke.
So when we created the contract with Steve, it was in the back of my mind that we would have some way to index with regards to inflation and changes in the PERS contribution and all that for the hours that he charges. We didn't specifically explicitly include that. You can see it in some of the language that was the intent, but it wasn't called out. These amendments to Steve's contract simply call that out and allow us to make the COLA adjustment that other employees get and to track the PERS contribution for the hours that he works, which has typically been 15 hours a week, 12 hours a week, the last 2 months. So it's pretty much what we anticipated in terms of the contract usage. And my apologies for not having those details nailed down in the initial one. Part of it is live and learn. As you work through these, you find things that you can do better. So I'm submitting that for your approval.
I have no comments.
Me either.
Recommended action, I will entertain a motion.
Did he?
He said he had no comments either.
Oh, I'll make a motion that we approve amendment to employment contract for Steve Jokes effective November 22nd, 2022.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 The motion carries. Thanks, Chris. New business, Next item under new business, December commission meetings.
So the request came to me, could we look at having a single meeting in December? And that seemed like a very reasonable request, especially as other elected agencies are able to do that. Turns out they're set up differently than we are. And we do need to have the second meeting to approve checks and vouchers. So the first thing I would ask you to entertain is that the second meeting in December be reduced to a virtual meeting, a Zoom meeting. That's available to everybody. It's an open public meeting, but the only thing on the agenda would be the checks and vouchers. And so we could go through that and execute it very, very quickly.
So that's the December 20 meeting.
Yes. And it's only a week after our December 13th meetings. They're very close.
I have no issues with that, Commissioner Murphy or Commissioner Deshmani.
No.
Okay, do we have a recommended action or you just need a head nod?
Just a head nod on
Okay.
that. And then we'll issue that in the public notice.
Okay,
The second part is we have two parts of I call it the Water 201 class. And the second half of it deals with the operations of the utility and kind of physical descriptions of it. The first half we're going to do next Monday.
Mhm.
Do you guys want me to nail down a date in December to have the second half of that? Or would we prefer to wait until January? And it's a scheduling issue. I think that Jamie's shown a willingness. She said she was going to attend next Monday. So I think if we hold it in December, that's great. If we hold it in January, that's great. I don't have a preference. It's, what's your preference for having another meeting in December?
My opinion is we should make sure Jamie can attend the second one as well. So.
Yeah, I think if you guys want to have a second one in December, then I can float that out to her and make it contingent on her availability. If you guys don't want to have one in December, then we'll be scheduling in January and it should be fine that way, although we'll invite Mike because I really want him to see the second half of this.
Go ahead.
Because December's December, it's a very busy time. It might be best to move it to January so that everybody has a little room because we already have two meetings. Well, one Zoom and the last meeting will be on the 13th, but I don't know, we got a young family, O'Toole, I don't know how busy you'll be,
It's
so.
okay with me.
So
Well, why don't we check in with Jamie and see if what her schedule is looking like, and I mean, December is a busy month. I think I could fit it in, but I think having it in January would be fine too.
well, you bring up a good point because I would see this not only be important to you and O'Toole, but especially for Jamie, you can kind of get up to speed. And I think it'd be better for her to actually be a commissioner at that time and sit on those meetings. So I think January would be a better time for her. What would you think? And December is always busy. I got to go out and get a Christmas tree.
Well, and just to assure everybody that one of the purposes of this whole educational effort is to establish an orientation program. So, this will be something that we will offer to incoming folks that are elected, incoming new employees. It'll be useful all the way around for people to know this.
Well, why don't we aim for January then for the second meeting?
Okay.
The special, because it will be a special meeting,
Yeah.
right? So
We really want it separate from the regular.
why don't we do that? And if we can just start working on a date offline, that'll probably be good, because January is also going to be busy because the legislative session starts and all that. So okay.
So if I may ask, so right now, Chris, I see we have a special meeting coming up on Monday.
Mhm.
And then we'll have December the 13th and a Zoom on December the 20th.
That's correct.
And that's it for the year.
That's it.
Okay, good. I got it around. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to general manager's report.
I think next week, a lot of us are going to be over in Spokane, or attending meetings by Zoom. And I'll be over there, and then I'll be taking some vacation the week after. So I'll be out of the district physically for about 7 or 8 straight days. I'll work with Brian to get him up to speed on that. The only other thing I have to report is that I got asked by Sharon Shoemake to come into her class and talk about externalities, her economics class. And it was off the cuff discussion we had about shutting down a coal plant, and that's where it led to. She said, I need you to come in and talk to the kids. It's like, okay, I'll be doing that next Monday, right before our water 201. I'll make it here on time. Timing works. So that's it for my report, unless you guys have questions for me. Oh, we had fun this weekend. Went out and helped the Nooksack salmon recovery folks plant a whole bunch of trees. And it was along Terrell Creek, and Commissioner Grant was there in June, and they were expecting 18 volunteers. They got about 30. And it was really, really kind of nice. It was fun. I got real muddy and cold, and then hot and sweaty, and got a lot done.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Moving on to the operations report.
Morning, Commissioners. I have just one item to bring to your attention. It's something we haven't discussed in a while, but Chris and I have continued to support the Blue Wolf Financial Group's efforts to purchase and restart the Intalco aluminum plant. And in the last few weeks, I think things have ramped up a little bit. We've had several Zoom meetings, either with Bonneville staff individually or Blue Wolf staff, or in the case last week, Chris had a meeting, online meeting that involved both the Blue Wolf staff and Bonneville. And what Blue Wolf's trying to do is trying to find a path forward to get transmission arrangements and power supply arrangements in place so that they're in position to actually start that plant again and achieving an economic power supply. And it's been very challenging for them, and we're supporting them in any way we can. You know, we're looking at both, are there any options for federal power supply left on the table? And if not, you know, what are the options on the non-federal side? And so what you'll see is in the discussions with Bonneville, if we're talking about any kind of Bonneville supply, you're dealing with Bonneville Power Services Group. If you're talking about non-federal supply, everything shifts over to the transmission group. So just want to let you know those discussions are continuing, and we're supporting in any way we can Blue West efforts. Just a couple of side comments. I think that the longer this goes on, the chances are slimmer that they'll be able to start. The other thing is, right now with the power markets where they are in the region, in the Northwest, West Coast, it's very difficult for a large load, you know, energy intensive load, to secure power supply at a price that makes it economic for them to operate. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have regarding that, but that's
Well, I've got questions, yes.
Commissioner DeSmond.
So I'm thinking about the spread between the rate of increase in electricity prices and the rate of increase of commodity aluminum prices. So unless I'm missing something, one of the reasons that this is being reconsidered is that electricity is becoming more expensive, but in general, not nearly as fast as metals. And so I have to believe that that's a big reason why they're still exploring ways to solve this problem.
Yeah, I would, without getting into details, I would support that. The price of aluminum right now, today, I looked at the London price, was $2,300 a metric ton. Several years ago, I looked at the difference between the power supply cost and aluminum prices, and that was back in 2015.
At that time, the price of aluminum was $1,300 a metric ton. It took a power supply price in the neighborhood of $29 a megawatt hour to economically operate. So obviously, as the price of aluminum shifts up, the plant operator is able to pay more for power. So yeah, that's part of the factor here.
So,
The other part, Atul,
sorry.
there's something else in play here. In addition to that, the US government is helping Blue Wolf because they recognize that you can't rely on Russia for 80% of your aluminum, which is where we have found ourselves in the last 2 years. So there are strategic investments that are being made in this plant that really help offset some of their capital that they're going to use to make it a much more efficient process. So there's other things that are happening. It's not just the commodity price arbitrage.
Thank you, Chris. One of the things that I shared with you, Chris, I just want to repeat again is that I don't think we can. Of course, you guys are doing a lot, and I've no ability to figure out how you manage all of the things that you're doing and the subject of energy, you and Ryan, Chris. But having said that, I really appreciate the time you guys are spending on exploring supply, not just for our customers, but for our potential growth ideas. So I'm hoping that when you're talking to people about supply for a potential customer, you're also exploring supply options for us. And I'm hoping that when you're doing that, you're increasing our competency and understanding of what the supply options are for us in this corner of the state. And I'm probably just boring you with this comment, but I guess you're already on it. But I just wanted to express how important I think that is to the PUD for us to be really on top of new supply.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So Brian, when will we, I mean, I know you don't, everyone, this is the question everyone wants to know, but I mean, what are the timelines? Do we know any specifics, or when might Blue Wolf be making a final decision?
Well, it depends on what they want to do. And if they want to work through us, then, they'll need to make that decision whenever they make it. And then it'll take some time to set it up. And there'll be a process to go through with Bonneville and all that. If they choose not to engage us directly, they could potentially move a lot quicker, and we'll know the day we know. And they won't announce it to us or anything. It'll be public knowledge when it happens.
Okay.
So I don't know what they're going to do. I think it's going to be a bit of a surprise when it happens. And I'm hoping they light the lights.
But so they're still trying to make it pencil. They just haven't quite figured out.
Yeah, I think on the power supply side, they've actually got that part figured out. It's how to get the power here.
Okay.
And what's the best way to do that. I think that's the real issue they're struggling with at this point.
Okay.
So all we got to
Thanks
do
for
is
the
improve
update.
transmission. All we got to do is run some transmission lines over the mountain.
That's right. We got to fix the cross cascade ties. That's all we got to do.
All we got to do, let's get on it, guys.
Yeah. I don't know. Brian, what's keeping you?
Oh,
What's keeping
man.
you, Brian?
I'll take care of it next week, Commissioner.
I thought you should be calling from you should be calling in from a mobile trailer, with the job crew.
No, we've talked about this several times. You talk about a future power supply, non-emitting power, renewables. Transmission is the key, and that's the bottleneck. And it's costly and it takes time to get in place.
Is that it from you, Brian?
That's it. Thank you,
For the
Commissioner.
operations report? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to commissioner reports. Who would like to go first? Commissioner Murphy?
That's because I'm sitting on your
You're
right side.
right here.
Yeah.
Tell me
That's
about
right.
yourself.
Besides meeting with Chris and a few others, I attended the WAPUTA meetings. I just looked for my notes and I must have left them all at home, but I did do the roundtable, the government. And I did the board meeting on the Friday there. But I did see O'Toole there. So O'Toole, you probably are sitting right there with your notes.
I'll do my best. So on
Okay.
Wednesday was the education session. You may go, Mike? Would you like me to speak, Mike?
Should he start his report?
Yes. please.
Okay, go ahead, Atul.
All right, I didn't want to cut you off, Mike. So regarding Wapuda, on Wednesday, the education section was on cyber security. And it was informative. Now when I remember discussing this some maybe a year or two ago, and it was fair to say that most PUDs had really very little happening in terms of commissioner awareness and education on cybersecurity. But now in this latest meeting, several of the commissioners talked about training that they're participating in, like our commissioners do, on cybersecurity. And the point that was raised again, which was raised at PERMS, was the importance of ransomware as a threat, and then the related importance of maintaining good backups by organizations to prevent damage from those kinds of attacks. And I guess that's the point to share about that. I think Commissioner Grant was on the telecom meeting on Thursday, so I'll let you talk about that. I missed the water committee meeting because I had a conflict, but the energy committee meeting was in the afternoon, and I believe that maybe Commissioner Grant will talk about that as well. But there was an adoption of federal priorities of policy at the board of directors meeting on Friday that we've all received. It really was nothing earth-shattering regarding the adoption of federal and state policy, except for one thing that is now a repeating theme at WAPUDA. And that is for WAPUDA to try to get the executive department, which means in cases Department of Ecology, in cases means Department of Commerce, and so on, and including, for example, the broadband office, to do a better job of honoring legislative intent. And they're going to be asking us as commissioners to support or express our thoughts and support of that basic philosophy. And speaking for myself, I agree with that because I feel that when the executive goes, just like when when the executive goes too far beyond what is the legislative intent, it undermines the legislative intent. So one example is in rulemaking around CETA. And another example is I would argue, is the amount of delays. I don't think the legislator intended that for this NOFO from the broadband office to be so delayed. So we can come up with other examples. But as a commission, we probably need to make sure that there's some harmony between how we look at this issue of rulemaking and executive action and legislative intent. But it's certainly an important topic that's coming up at WAPUDA.
Thanks, Commissioner Deshmani. So I also attended the WAPUDA meetings, telecom committee meeting. I know Chris was there, and Andrew, I believe you were on it as well. But Stephanie went over some of the legislative priorities, which relate to funding and preventing kind of clawbacks in terms of the retail authority bill. And then there was a pretty long discussion about the NOFO delay, and the state broadband office exceeded our expectations by getting it out so quickly. But I think that other PUDs and the association share our frustration with the delay. And I was not able to speak with him yet, but I did reach out to Representative Alex Rammel from the 40th district, which covers a lot of my district, just to let him know about some of those concerns. That was before the NOFO dropped. But like you were bringing up, Commissioner Deshmani, I think that the legislative intent around some of these grant dollars and the urgency around the infrastructure need with broadband would be a concern to some legislators if they knew about just how long the delays were. So, you know, kind of just continuing to have those conversations, I think is helpful. I also covered the water committee, and there were also, I'm just pulling up my notes here. There were, Bill Clark talked about the legislative priorities for the association, and kind of some key things were trying to rebuild the public works assistance account, which seems to always get rated by other tax needs. So the association wants to let tax sources go back to this account to rebuild it. They're not optimistic that this is going to change. Legislature always find reasons to take money away from this account. Utility relocation funding for culverts, with funding coming from the Public Works Board, Ecology's budget request for the 2 adjudications in the state, which is looking to be around 5 million per biennium. Funding for droughts. One of the issues is the legislative session happens early in the year, droughts materialize later. So setting aside funding to help for those late breaking droughts, and money for a state revolving loan fund for water system repair. So those were kind of the key things. And then some updates from different PUDs about preparing for winter storms and things like that. And a pretty consistent theme that we heard, and you know, other PUDs are different, but just how important social media has been for communicating with their customers when things come up, and also supply chain challenges for a number of things, especially vehicles. And as Chris said, yeah, we did the Nooksack Salmon Enhancement Association community work party. It was really fun and just good to kind of get on the ground with one of the organizations that we support financially. I know a few folks, staff said they were interested, but had other things going on. So those community work parties start up again in the spring. And so I'll send information out about another one so we can do another one once it warms up a bit. So that's it from me. Let's move on to public comment.
And we had a comment from Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie, Jamie is still on. Jamie, did you wanna, there you are.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks for staying on.
Just make sure, I can't see myself, so am I visible as well?
We can see your picture, but if you want to turn your camera on, we could see you in real time.
I'm just allowing him to talk. That doesn't include the camera.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Okay, never mind then. That works
Okay.
fine. So yeah, so thank you for opportunity to comment. Of course, I'm wanting to comment about the broadband presentation. I'm a big advocate for publicly owned open access broadband network. And I see lots of good things in the study, and glad that the grant proposals arrived here for seeking funding. I've been a big fan of Kitsap's approach there, where they provide wholesale services and reserve the right, though, to do retail service if the need arises. I want to just comment here on the idea of a publicly owned and open access. I personally believe that if you have an agreement where the ownership really goes to the telecom company that constructed the network, the fiber, if it transitions to them after 25 years, you don't really have a publicly owned network. It's not really yours. You've just been, it turns into basically a way for another scheme for publicly funding the private expansion of telecom company. And they're perfectly willing to wait 25 years and let you have it as a sandbox to play in because it's going to be theirs. So I think you really got to really look hard at that and not fool yourself into thinking that you're creating a publicly owned network when in fact you're really subsidizing the telecom company to expand theirs. The other thing as far as open access is that it's very important that there be a menu of ISPs to choose from for customers to really have an open access network. If you wind up where you say it's an open access network and okay, there's one ISP or there's two ISPs, but only one of them is really the only one that can be selected, then it really isn't. Customers don't have a choice. It's not really open access. You really have a monopoly. The network has to be in a situation where a customer can go over and choose from a menu of ISPs, and then be able to say, you know, I made a wrong choice. I want to switch. And be able to switch. If you look over at Kitsap, ISPs there offer both monthly and year contracts. And so if you're on a monthly one, you could switch and go to a different ISP provider because you realize that you could get better service or you feel you could get better service. Or, if it's a year contract, after the contract's up, after a year, you can make that switch. So I'd really stress that as you evaluate the different choices and options that are being looked at, you really make sure that you've got, if you're going to call it publicly owned, that it really is publicly owned. I mean, you have it until you decide to get rid of it. Or the public decides to sell it. And not be hoodwinked into essentially subsidizing the telecom companies. And that it really is open access, and because Comcast and others they play this game in a much larger arena. They are very, very good at being able to maneuver and slice things to try to be able to get the best advantage for them. Other telecom companies are really looking out for their interests that way. That's why it's so important to have, I think, an open access network and to have it publicly owned, particularly at the infrastructure level. Because a great analogy I see with this is just think about a highway system. We talk about this information highway. If you think about our highway system, think about what a mess we would have if different pieces of our highway system were privately owned. And and that's the kind of situation where we get ourselves in when we start talking about telecom. That's why I think you really want to have a network that's publicly owned and operated at the infrastructure level, and then have lots of different ISPs to choose from that can compete and offer services to customer. To me, this is the best of both worlds. So, and thanks for all your work on this. I really appreciate myself being able to interact with Chris and Andrew, and looking forward to what we can do on the grants. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts on the whole idea of public ownership and open access for broadband network. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Can I?
Yeah,
make a-
Yeah. Mhm.
Jamie, I just want to say thank you. Andrew and I really value the time we spend with you and the feedback that you give us, and you're civil, you're respectful, you're intelligent, insightful, and you're really an extension of our team here. So thanks for being there.
Thank you.
Okay,
Chris.
do we
I
have any
appreciate
other-
that.
Do we have any other folks that want to make a comment?
I will comment on broadband, and I will do that at the session you have specifically set aside for that type of comment at the next meeting.
Okay. Okay, Mike or, I mean, is there any other? Nobody in the panelists that's trying to raise their hand? Okay. Just saw. Well, like we just mentioned, or we'll have a public hearing on broadband on under old business at our next meeting. So looking forward to more conversations about this. Looks like we don't have any other hands up, so I'm going to close public comment. And the next item under our agenda is an executive session related to potential litigation for the water rights adjudication. So I'm gonna recommend that we take a 5-minute break and then come back at 10:16 for that.
There'll be no action coming out of that.
No action, yeah. Thank you,
10:16 would
everyone.
be- 10:16 would be 5-minute break, according to Mike.
Yeah, didn't I say a 5-minute break? Yeah, 5-minute break.
Okay, I thought I heard 10. Sorry.
Hello?
Hey, Mike.
Hey, what's going on?
Paul. Hey, are you in your office?
Yes, I am.
Hey, do you have, can you try to look at the repeater camera? On that camera?
Yep. 1 second.
It was showing,
Hey, Paul, can you give me
Yeah.
can you give me 1 sec? I have to switch
Sure.
I have to switch back on the commission meeting. All right, I'll be right back.
okay, no problem.
Pretty car, all washed, wearing nice clothes, and picked up a bird that was processed and all prepped, and we were all covered in blood. So sometimes the tables are turned, and sometimes the commissioner is actually the guy doing the dirty work.
Hold on.
Recording in progress.
Sorry about that. That was my fault. Hey, Christine, can you just speak into the mic just to make sure that it's still on?
Hello?
Yep, okay, cool. Thank you.
Do you want me to say that again?
Nope, I hear you now. Thank you.
Are we good?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want me to close the meeting again?
Yeah, because we didn't hear it online.
Okay, so We just finished an executive session related to potential litigation for water rights adjudication. There was no action. The meeting is now closed. Thank you.